Welcome to Imagine Once interview with the pro. This month, really excited to get to talk to a good buddy of mine, Seth Mendelsohn. Seth and I go way back to our days at Disney together. He is a game designer by trade, but also working in the theme park space, working on home video games, a lot of other really fun things along the way. So I hope you enjoy talking about his journey. So we're going to bring him in right now. This is Seth. I gave a little bit of an intro, but if you wouldn't mind, would you mind giving like the elevator spiel on who you are? Who's Seth? What do you do?
Sure. So I start off life as a game tester back in the early days in the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, and went from there to moving into game design and game production. And as time went on, I worked on a number of different games and have always been a huge Disney fan and a Disney park fanatic, and eventually found my way to Walt Disney Imagineering and worked in research and development. And through my career at Disney, 16 years, I was very lucky to meet some great people, including Kevin, who, again, as he said, a great friend and a great creative partner.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I always like chatting with you in your office and coming up with bonkers ideas. Would you mind, what are some of the things you've worked on over the years that people may have played?
Sure. So some of the bigger games, Aladdin for the Sega Genesis, Lion King for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, a game called Ultima Ascension, part of a set of computer role-playing games called Ultima. And then in the more modern times, a product for Disney called Virtual Magic Kingdom, VMK. And just recently, a new game on Roblox called Landscape Design Empire. So a little mix of everything from old to new.
That's fantastic. I want to learn more about that. Your new stuff. But what kind of stuff did you do in the parks that people might have experienced?
Sure. So I was lucky enough, worked in a couple different parts of Disney related to the theme parks, and the first one was for Parks and Resorts Online. And they primarily are the site where you will learn information about the parks and purchase tickets. And two of the big games were Virtual Magic Kingdom, an online, massively multiplayer online game, which was I would say a digital version of Disneyland, Magic Kingdom, and theme parks. Another product called Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters Online. And while it doesn't exist anymore, this was something that connected the really great Buzz Lightyear attraction at Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World to a game at home. And people at home started playing a game, and they were paired up with folks inside of a ride vehicle, and they helped each other out and get power-ups and bonuses and scores. And at the end, they got a combined score. So something that's different. It's not there anymore, but it was certainly something interesting.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but Virtual Magic Kingdom doesn't technically exist anymore, but it still lives on with fans who have almost revived it, like a zombie version they're playing, right?
Yeah, there actually is. It's amazing. There is a product online that is kind of like a love letter to it, which is interesting too, because it was, I guess it was around about 3 or 4 years. And, you think about it now and you're like, wow, I'm amazed that people remember it, because a lot of stuff that goes on for a few years, a lot of stuff happens between then. And it's probably been 10 plus years since it was live.
That's insane. Let's talk about, let's go back in the time machine, and we're going to go back and we're going to visit young Seth, little Seth with a head full of hair, no doubt. What was do you remember the first game you ever played that really grabbed your attention and said, hey, this is my calling, this is where I need to go?
I remember, it's funny because I remember the first video game that I actually really remember is Atari Fire Engine. And then there was another older racing game, and that was, it was little. Then really I was lucky that growing up really in what would be called the arcade kind of golden era of arcade games, where you went from the earlier arcade games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man to, a lot of games that came out every week. New arcade games came out. And so played a lot of arcade games. On the home systems, I think the first thing we had was something called Ultra Pong, and then an Intellivision. And so, a lot of things were related to those things. The first computer I had was a Commodore VIC-20, then a Commodore 64. And the first game, I think probably the first game that really opened my eyes was a game on the Atari 400 and 800 called Star Raiders.
Hmm.
And this was a game that was kind of like Star Wars. Like you flew in a ship and you docked and you got fuel and you went through space. And a lot of games had been a lot more simplistic. And this was this game that had a little bit of depth to it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever. I've got to have a computer. And I think from there, just playing a lot of games kind of set me on a path.
Yeah, I think we have to like explain to some of like the younger viewers, like anyone who can pick up their phone now and you can download any game imaginable with all these little like amazing details and colorful characters. But we're talking back in the day where it was two lines on a screen going up and down playing a game of table tennis. Like that's the era in which that you caught that bug, which is
Yeah.
phenomenal when you think
And,
about it.
yeah, I mean, so much has changed in a short amount of time in terms of how games are made and how many people are involved with them. But it was amazing that you saw these things and they represented racing or sports or adventures, and all these things. And as time has gone on, the complexity of the games, the fidelity of the games has grown, and you're able to tell a lot more stories, a lot more visualization. But in the early days, it's a lot more. You look at it and you have to use your imagination a little bit to kind of appreciate what you're seeing.
So, also kind of looking back into what inspired you, what types of like imagined worlds were you a fan of? What was your fandom as a kid? What kind of world did you wish you could visit? You wanted to visit the world of the Flintstones or Star Wars, or like what were you into as a kid?
I think the two biggest things, Star Wars was probably the key thing. I think I was 8 years old when it came out, and so everything was Star Wars, this and that. Um, and then the other one was Disneyland. We went to Disneyland for the first time when I was 6 or 7, and it was the greatest place ever. And I got this map. They used to sell these park maps that you unfolded, and I had it on
Yeah.
my wall. And they always had kind of a coming soon thing, and in the corner was Big Thunder Mountain was coming soon. And I looked at that map, and then I got this book, the 25th anniversary of Disneyland, and I looked at that book and I looked at that map, and I was into that and into Star Wars. So those were probably the best two things to talk about that I was really into.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the map. One, because this month's activity for the box is going to be a map making exercise. A whole fantasy map will be a lot of fun. But the idea of the Disneyland Fun map, which if you've never seen before, is a beautifully illustrated map of Disneyland with characters on the border. But so many people of my generation, your generation, that was like their take home souvenir, because you could take that home and you can put that up on the wall as a poster. And then you just look back and remember all the things that you did and then all the things you want to do on your next trip to Disneyland. Those fun maps had such an emotional pull for a lot of creatives.
Yeah, and they were beautiful. And I mean, everything was there, all the paths, all the attractions, everything was there. And so it really was a way to see the parks, because there was no internet. There wasn't ways that you could see the park. And you also saw it as an entire story, one place, as opposed to seeing a little section of it. And I think when you saw it together, you saw how the world fit together. And when you came in on Main Street and you came to the hub and all these things you could do, and the map really just does a great job of telling that story.
I agree, man. So let's think about some of the projects you've worked on. What do you think is your crown jewel of a project so far? You're far from done in your game design career. But like so far, what has been your proudest moment as far as a game that you've worked on?
Well, I guess there's like a few moments. I think the first really big moment was that I did the music for a Game Boy game called Caesar's Palace for the old black and white Game Boy. And it really was the first thing that I did where it made it into a game, and I saw that game on the shelf, and it was like this amazing amount of pride of like, you worked on something that was in there. Because I had worked on a lot of games, game testing and giving notes in here and there, but this was the first thing that was very tangible. So that has a real special place. The next one was Aladdin for the Genesis, because I was the lead designer and built levels and everything in the world. And so that was the one where it was the first chance to really take something and again, put something into a tangible form and have people play it. And so those are the big moments. And then I think, the last one is we go back to VMK a lot, but it's kind of like if someone said, "Hey, you can make anything you want to make." Like, I want to make Disneyland. I want to make I want to make a theme park. And we were able to do that, and not only get to build it, but interact with the folks in it, because so many things are one way. You make a game and you're sending it out there, and you don't know what the reaction is. But in VMK, there was players, and we would speak with them in the game, and occasionally we'd meet them in the parks, and you'd get the feedback from them. You'd hear what they liked and what they didn't like, and that cycle of cause and effect was great, because you would hear what people were looking for, what they were disappointed with, or what they didn't understand, and you could react to it. And I think that's a huge change of the world of interactivity in games today from the old days. The old days, you made a product, you put it in a box, and it went out there. Today, things can get fixed and patched and changed, and they update too, because games start off as one thing and they grow over time. So even what you've started with doesn't necessarily mean that's what you're going to end up.
100% true. What was it like, that experience, taking the iconic Disneyland or Magic Kingdom parks and putting it into the virtual Magic Kingdom world? Like, how did you pick and choose what elements were going to make it into there? Like, what aspirational moments, things like that?
That's a really good question. I think, you start off with the basics. Like, we kind of started off a little more focused on what was there. And as the project went on, realized that we had the ability to not just take what was a copy of parks, but kind of change it a little bit to make it fit for the game. And also to add in a lot of elements that that people might not notice, but true, really invested fans would get. And so one of the things was there was a space inside of the Matterhorn, and we have the Skyway coming through it, which doesn't happen anymore. And we chose the bucket Skyways instead of the little square, the latest ones. And we would get comments from people all the time of, "Oh my gosh, not only do I remember the Skyway, but I remember where they were round." And we would try to put in those touches throughout the world so that people would bring back these memories and just kind of have this thing of like, wow, the people that made this really appreciate and understand the park. Because a lot of it is being respectful of all the work that had come before, and not making something that either didn't make sense or didn't make sense to the fans. And so a lot of it was taking the best elements, making them fit for the game. Because the other thing is it has to be a game. It's not a theme park. So a lot of it is there's activities to do, and there has to be things that are fun to do. And so you have this kind of balance between what's there in traditional and to what makes sense for this new medium. But we spoke with so many folks from Imagineering and spoke with people, and and you got these kind of things that they loved and things they wanted to put in, and it was a nice combination of what came before and then what you're doing moving forward.
You mentioned music. What role do you think music plays in world building? If you're designing a game, how important is that music aspect to that?
It's funny that music and sound effects are one of those things that you notice when they're not there, or when they're not done well. Like, I think you take for granted when they're done well. They set the mood. They tell stories, sound effects, music, lack of music. And it's a huge part of things. And in the early days of video games, it's funny too, because you had a limited amount of space. Music and sound effects were the first thing that got cut, right? We didn't have enough space to do this. Cut the music. And so, 8-bit music derived because it was very inexpensive to fit onto the cartridge, that you can kind of make things very small.
8-bit music being the beeps and the boops.
The beeps and the boops, yeah. Yep. But when you realize how much it sets the mood and how much it helps with storytelling, and that's with a lot of things. I mean, again, same thing with theme parks, that you hear sounds and sound effects, and if they're done well, you don't notice them because they just become part of the world. Like I said, you really notice them when they're not there, or they're not what you expect. And so they're really a critical part of interactivity of everything, right? You expect things. I mean, why do we have sound effects on fake buttons? Like your iPhone, it makes a little sound and it shakes because it makes you want to think it's a real button, even though there's no reason for it to be a button. And so sound effects are the same way. When they're not there and when they're not right, you really notice them.
Even like in going back to Star Wars, right? As soon as you hear that Darth Vader march, he's coming, and it automatically sets the tone before the performer even makes it onto the screen.
Yeah, and for those that have seen Jaws, I mean, it's what is it? Dun, 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 dun. I mean, just like 3 or 4 notes. And again, I think you really do. It's such a big part of placemaking and storytelling. It's easy to assume that you don't need it, but you really do.
So, what advice do you have for any young creatives wanting to get into the world of game design? I know it's. I'm assuming things have changed quite a bit since you burst onto the scene. But for anybody else like wanting to focus their creative priorities towards that world, what advice do you have?
I think today, it's changed a lot. That a lot of game design is not just the creative aspects, but it's also some amount of coding and scripting. Scripting is the way that you're telling the world how to react and how to interact with other things. And so, it isn't just having a really great idea or an interesting idea. It's having that and the ability to visualize it or code it. And there are a lot more tools now, AI tools and other things that help kind of get the concept out of you. But a lot of game design now is also this part of learning to code. And so there are a number of languages, and it changes over time of what the scripting and tool languages are. But I think you have to have some knowledge of coding in addition to having a creative mind. I think the other thing is learning about what is in the world. Like, I know it sounds silly, play games to learn about games, but it really does matter because there's a lot of content out there, and this language to be able to speak with people to say, oh, it's like this, or this is the mechanic, or this is the the methodology. It helps. And so when you talk with game folk, you can have reference points that make sense. And as I think that's a lot of it. The other thing I will say, and I have some my kind of like rules in my head, if that makes sense to share. You always want to have an idea in your head. And I think this is for all creatives. I think you want to have 2 ideas in your head. One idea that you're willing to share with people, and one that is like your secret idea for one day, you'll win $1 million and you get to make whatever you want. But it becomes important because at some point in time, you might have the opportunity to pitch something. And I had a couple ideas in mind, and I got very lucky in one of the projects I worked on, and I joined this new team, and my boss said to me, okay, what are we going to do? I said, I got 2 ideas. And I said, the first one, he said, done, we're doing that. If I hadn't had something in my head, we probably could have gotten to something, but I feel like it's a really good thing to have something in your head. So someone says to you, hey, Kevin, what game do you want to make? What movie do you want to make? What attraction do you want to make? And if you're like, I don't really know,
Yeah.
opportunity lost. But I think you have something in your head like, well, what would be really cool? So I think that's really important that you have something, that you love and are passionate about. And who knows, maybe, you get to do it, or maybe you get to make it yourself. But I think it's really important to have that.
Or there could be an element of that you can then use for something else that might come up. Just always having that idea in your back pocket is always
yeah, I found that to be really good. And again, you would be surprised how many times you come across things. And like I said, writers pitching an idea, you maybe you are in the elevator and you do get to get the elevator pitch. It's an opportunity that you take because, again, you don't know where life will bring you. So I think that's really important.
That's fantastic advice.
You want some other bits of advice that I can share?
I won't say no.
I think one of the most important things to starting any project is to have a tangible goal of what you are trying to do. And I'm sure we can both tell stories about stuff where, you didn't know where you're going. The truth of it is, every single thing you do, you need to have a tangible goal of what are you trying to do. It needs to be very tangible, like it is to make X amount of money. It's promotional. It needs to be seen by this, because the design you are going to do and your creativity is based upon what your goal is. And, an example that we could both agree on is you need to make a theme park attraction that serves 1,000 people an hour. And that's a different thing from 3,000 people an hour.
Yeah.
Right. They're very different things. It's like you're still making a thing, but depending on what the actual goal is and what success is, it's a very different path you take.
Yeah.
And
we need to cater for teens, or versus we need to cater towards preschoolers. Like, that's an entirely different goal.
Who's the audience? Is it a free product? Is it a subscription product? Is it microtransaction product? There's all these things that come up. And so if you start with that, it's really, really critical. Right. The second thing is that a shared vision of what the product is really critical too. That ultimately you all have to understand what it is you're doing, and it's really helpful that there's one person or two people that are like they're the gatekeepers of the vision, and they can say, okay, when we come up with, I don't know what to do, is it this or this? Like somebody ultimately has to go up the chain, right? That it's hard to have a lot of different things come in from everywhere. That a lot of successful products, really, somebody has a vision and they're a great deliverer of the vision, so that the rest of the team knows what they're doing.
And you need the maestro, the conductor orchestra.
That's a great analogy. And the last thing I will say is that, this is a Walt thing. If it's fun to do the impossible, the truth of it is, not much is truly impossible. Problems are solved with time and resources. But the truth is, as you try to solve things that are very difficult, sometimes you come up with other things, right? So you say, I want to have, flying cars and jetpacks. Well, the truth of it is, maybe you start thinking about that, and along the way, you come up with something entirely different. And that's really important, because I worked with a really great brainstorm person. And he had said, you go to a brainstorm and everyone has these ideas. They're like A, B, and C, the normal ideas. And then someone throws out crazy, Q, some other idea. And you laugh at it. But the truth of it is, sometimes that has some bearing on something that maybe was said in jest. But the truth of it is, you're like, wow, that's so crazy and out there.
Who's the Q guy? I was throwing out.
Well, and that was a lot. I mean, a lot of the stuff in Imagineering was somebody came up with some crazy challenge. But the truth is, like, again, things are possible, right? Like, you may think it's, but the truth is, like, the hard challenges that you try to do. And again, in games I've worked on, there was like, man, I wish we could do this. And you sit around and somebody says, oh, you know what? So in Lion King, really wanted to stampede, and we talked about what we wanted. And the lead programmers said, wait, here's how we can solve this problem. And so I think it's really important. Again, you don't want to just give up on something because you think it's hard. That again may not lead you to the original intent, but it leads you somewhere interesting.
Speaking of which, earlier you mentioned Roblox. Is there anything you can talk about to that, or is it all hush hush?
No, it's a real product. We worked with a group called the National Association of Landscape Professionals.
Okay.
And they are working to help folks know that landscaping is an interesting career choice. It's a really cool career choice, and that it's more in depth than people may realize. And so we worked with them to create a game, and you decorate different yards.
Oh,
and so you have items that you get a theme and some things. You have to fulfill the goals of that. You have to fulfill how much grass, and you have an amount of water, because you got to be mindful of how much water things are using. And so you put these together, and so you decorate the different lands, different yards.
That sounds incredibly nerdy and fun.
Yeah, it's again, it's one of those things where you might not have thought it was I don't know what that is, and is it just this and that, and it's like, no, it's decoration, it's maintenance, and all these things. And so it was a fun game. It was a fun game to make this, and we're still expanding it and stuff like that. And so sometimes it's funny. I mean, you go from really giant projects to smaller projects, and it's fun to kind of do both things. And it was fun to kind of dive really deep back into game design again and talk about what the items are and how much they cost and how big they are and what flower it should be and all these things and all the little stories. And it's just, like I said, it's fun to kind of go the other way. Sometimes you work on really big projects to work on something that's a little more tidy.
Oh, that was half of the Roller Coaster Tycoon and SimCity experience back in the day, right? Was landscaping your projects.
Whoops. I mean, and the thing about SimCity is, now you know what it is now. But if you didn't know what it was, and someone said to you, "Hey, Kevin, what do you think about urban city planning? It seems really fun." You'd be like, "What? Urban city planning? The electricity and the pipes and all that." And the truth of it is like, it's such an awesome game, even in the early simplest form. And again, you're like, I never would have thought about that. And how many people decided they wanted to be city planners or mayors based upon that, or even Animal Crossing, right? Like, I want to be the mayor. So I think it's interesting that games sometimes can really help you get an understanding of different things. Fun bits too. It doesn't, you don't get the hard stuff, but it's certainly interesting that if that's an exciting thing and somebody is like, wow, this is a cooler thing than I thought, mission accomplished.
That seemed like the perfect way to drop the mic and walk away. Because once again, my interview has gone way longer than anticipated. I need to stop getting so many interesting people on these interviews. It was fantastic catching up with you, and I hope everybody listens to what you have to say and reflects and kind of looks at their own journey in the world of creative endeavors. If kids want to go into game design, I think you gave them some fantastic advice. Thank you for your time and joining us. That's Seth. You're amazing as always.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to a day when the two of us are making something else cool, which is going to be around the corner. I know.
We need to team back up. The world needs us. You have a great one, sir. Thank you so much for hanging on. Everyone from Imagine What, just keep on doing what you do, and we can't wait to see what you imagine. Thanks.